Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Glad to be here this morning. Hope you're all adjusting well. So we have live chat is up and running. I can see you. So just want to hop in there. You can say hello, or you can lurk in the corner, or whatever. It's cool. It doesn't. This is a no pressure kind of activity, but it's a way for us to sort of humanize our class, which is this is anthropology, so we want to be as human as possible. But I also find that it just creates an opportunity to sort of put some context around what we're talking about and give you an opportunity to sort of get to know me sort of virtually, but also I'm very expressive, and online formats I really try to incorporate some sort of interactive thing. So a pandemic time has made us very has sort of pushed us to be innovative. Even if we wanted to be innovative before, it sort of pushed us to really be innovative and not shy away from technology. So this is the first time I'm using live streams via YouTube for this course, and I'm actually very excited about it because it seems to be really interactive and something that we'll be able to use. I know it's a little awkward since we're doing some technology shifts at American in terms of, some of you are using multiple learning platforms this semester, and I'm sorry that you have to do that. I'm sorry that any of us are having to toggle between Blackboard and Canvas. Canvas generally is much more user-friendly, but I did not, at the time of developing the class, did not have access to Canvas, so I couldn't put stuff together in there, unfortunately. If things progress and we're able to do it seamlessly, we might transition over there if everybody is already using Canvas, and it would be easier to simplify and not have to toggle back and forth. But we're just going to play it by ear and use this technology. The great thing about YouTube is that I'll be able to put the recordings on Perusall. So you can actually interact with them and comment on them. And you'll see that we actually have some other YouTube videos and clips and things like that in there over the semester that we'll actually be doing that with. So you can select and highlight the sections that you want to make notes on, or that you have questions about, or whatever. So so let's get cracking. Wanted to take a couple of minutes before we actually got into the material to let people sort of trickle in. And so it is a no pressure sort of situation. If you need to pop off, that's fine. If you need to come in at a later than the 9 a.m. start, totally fine. You can always check back with the recordings to see what you missed, or to catch up. And you can start the stream, you can start the videos, or you should be able to start the videos even though it's a live stream, and just watch it chronologically through if you want to do it that way. So just have it at a later start. If you have problems with that, just wait until it's posted, or wait until the 10 a.m. hour when the broadcast ends, and you should be able to view it easily. So as we're going, if you guys have questions, or you need anything, thanks. You need anything, just yes, we will Mondays and Thursdays, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. This will be, so even though we're doing an asynchronous style course, this will be for those who really wanted a synchronous course but can't get it because pandemic time. So it will be Mondays and Thursdays, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. I'm going to be really intentional about stopping at 10. So even if we're not all the way through, we'll cover what we missed later, or I'll submit a supplemental or something like that. But in terms of live broadcast, for everyone's time and sort of maximizing our space efficiently. We can say virtual space, digital space. I'm going to be really, really specific about it being 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. So, and again, it's okay if you can't come for the whole thing and want to, pop in later or pop off early because you have something else that's mandatory. I know a lot of instructors are probably still struggling with the, I really need you to I need to know that you're here. We're going to have a relationship of mutual respect and trust this semester. So y'all are going to be doing your work. I'm going to be doing my work. We're going to meet here when we need to. We'll meet in my office hours. You can schedule via Calendly if you need to. But we are, as a class, as a group of people in this course, scattered across the globe. And so it's not practical for everybody to be in class at all times. So it's an unreasonable expectation. It's also an accessibility issue, right? So want to make sure that that this is as accessible as possible to everyone. I'm still working on making stuff universally accessible, but hopefully that is the case. You should also be able to use captions. I know that I can speak quickly sometimes. So if it's easier, you should be able to use captions. They're not my captions, and YouTube is notorious for miscaptioning things. So if you see a caption and you're like, what in the heck? Just let me know what it said, and I can either clarify or we can come up with it later. So the live streams will end at 10. Yes, always and forever. So the live streams will start at 9 and they will end at 10. We have all of the coursework that is on perusal and everything else. So just treat this like an asynchronous course with a dash of meeting time. All right, so let's get to the fun stuff. All right. Bear with me just a moment here. I'm going to pull a screen up. All right, so this is I'm going to try to incorporate some PowerPoint slides just so that you have reference to these. I'll make myself smaller here so we can actually see these and make them the focus. So Anthropology 110, Culture and Power. So again, this is a Habits of Mind course, which really asks us to think about, to develop our critical thinking skills, but to really think deeply and critically about the topics that we're going to talk about, some of which are the most pressing issues of our time as human beings. So we're going to get into that. You will notice, thank you everyone for the submitting the pretest. If you haven't submitted your pretest, please do that. It will give me a sense of your previous knowledge, but also you will see some references in these presentations to the concepts that are in the pretest and that we'll be talking about over time. So one of the objectives of the course, right, is specific vocabulary to anthropology. And those are some of the concepts and terms that we're going to be coming back to over and over in this course, and some of the key terms that you're going to need to learn, right? So let's see, got to go back into here so I can. All right. So week 1, foundations. Here we are, Monday. We're going to talk about a number of things today, and then we'll pick up on Thursday as well. So for Thursday, be sure that you read the Bohannon piece, Shakespeare in the Bush, and you'll also read Zora Neale Hurston's chapter from Mules and Men. And so we'll keep some of these things in mind, but I don't want to jump ahead too far. Let's get going. So our objectives for today are an orientation to the discipline. We're going to do a concept overview. We're going to talk about what is anthropology. We are going to talk about, and feel free to pop in with comments or if you have questions as we're going through this stuff. We're going to talk about holism. briefly, but really it's a philosophy. So we're going to come back to it and I'll remind you about it throughout the course. And we're also going to talk about culture, of course. We can't do anthropology without talking about culture. So I'm going to toggle back and forth just so I can take a look at things. And let's see. All right. All right, looking good. All right, just I'll be toggling back and forth just so I can make sure that I can see your comments as they are happening. All right, so what is anthropology? It is the study, boiled down to its most basic ideas. It is the study of what makes us human, right? What is it that makes us human, right? There are so many things, right? And it's not just physiologically, right? Biologically, what makes us human. It's all of the other things. It's all of the things that we do and we say and we interact with, all of the things that we love, all of the things that we despise, all of the ways that we interact with those things that make us who we are, right? One of my favorite features in the universe, one of my favorite pop culture things in the universe is science fiction, right? Because it is so good at telling us or showing us or contemplating and asking us to contemplate what it means to be human, right? I feel like all science fiction writers and creators and lovers of science fiction are at some level organic anthropologists. So we get a lot of anthropological messaging out of science fiction, in my experience, at least the science fiction that I enjoy reading and watching. Right. So there are 4 fields of anthropology, under which there are numerous subfields, right? Numerous subfields. We'll talk about those, but the most important thing is, or sort of the most critical thing for you to think about right now is that there are 4 fields of anthropology. Where the subfields come up, is something that we'll get into as it comes up. And if you see, and I mention that because if you don't see something here that you're like, but I thought this was a field of anthropology, it's an area of study, but it probably falls under one of these 4 major taxonomical fields, right? So we have sociocultural anthropology. This course focuses primarily on sociocultural anthropology. And there's a dash of linguistic anthropology thrown in because I also do some linguistic anthropology, and linguistic anthropology throws in or weaves in sociocultural anthropology in a lot of its work. There's also biological anthropology. Also, all of these are intermingled, right? None of them are necessarily islands, right? And archaeology, right? So just so you can see that, right? 4 fields of anthropology. I wanted it to be a ticker. Oh, well, but there you go. Right. So a lot of things pop up underneath there. So you can check out more about what is anthropology and sort of peruse the American Anthropological Association's page for more. If that isn't a live link that you can click on, it probably isn't. I will put it in I'll click on it here and I'll put it in the chat, and you can click on it if you so choose at a later time. Copy and paste it, whatever you'd like to do. So there we have sort of nuts and bolts introduction to anthropology, right? Okay, so then what do anthropologists do exactly, right? The number of times someone asks me what I do. First, I tell them that I teach. And then they ask me what I teach. And then I tell them that I'm an anthropologist. And then they say one of two things. Oh, I don't know what that is. Or, oh, so you look at dinosaur bones. No, I don't look at dinosaur bones. I look at humans. So common misconception, the paleontology versus anthropology. Dinosaur bones, super awesome, just not my field of expertise, right? But a lot of people just don't know what anthropology is or what anthropologists do, even though it's right there in the title, right? Anthro, meaning humans, ology, right? Meaning just the study of, right? So the study of humans. So we study what makes us human, including our societies and cultures, by taking a broad approach referred to as holism. I'll explain a little bit more about that momentarily, which considers human action or agency, language, beliefs, and interaction with the material world as part of an interconnected whole, right? So this is sort of how we do that, or how we envision under a way to understand the world, right? It's our sort of guiding philosophy, but it's also what guides our methodologies, right? So a little more on holism. It is a philosophy that assumes that everything is part of an interconnected whole, right? So holism, part of a whole, right? Spelled without the W because ostensibly it would look funny. I don't know. Right. That's a whole area of study, that etymology, the whole area of study that I'm also not an expert in, but I find deeply fascinating, particularly as a linguistic anthropologist. So, and people who are students of English, right? So in any native language, right, the mother tongue that someone speaks, they are eventually they become sort of, we take for granted a lot of the factors, like why holism isn't spelled with a W, right? We take for granted those as just normal. We don't really question them. Sort of like if somebody were to ask someone who's spoken English all their life what the pluperfect is in terms of conjugation, they would not be able to tell you in all likelihood, unless they're a grammarian, right? But somebody who's studying English or who has studied English will be able to tell you immediately what the pluperfect is, because they have to know those for conjugation purposes, right? So, so a little bit about linguistic anthropology is we get really funny about words and how words are used, right? But so holism, a philosophy that assumes that everything is part of an interconnected whole. For anthropologists, human existence, experience, and interaction with our surroundings and everything in it cannot be analyzed in isolation, right? So we can't talk about anything, but we'll take, for example, the pandemic, right? We can't talk about the pandemic solely in terms of biological health factors, right? We can't talk about it solely in terms of its novelty as a virus. We have to also talk about the conditions that make it easily surmountable in some places and make it really terrible in other places, right? And what those differences in conditions are. So if we take a holistic view, right, and think about all of the different pieces that are working together and interacting, and then how those pieces, right, how those structures, how those systems push down in different ways on different people, different individuals, different bodies, right? You're going to hear me talk a lot about bodies in this class. And when I say bodies, sometimes I'm referring to them in the abstract because I might be referring to bodies that are marked in multiple ways, right? So that are gendered, that are racialized, that are sexed in particular ways, that are classed in particular ways, right? That are abled or disabled in particular ways, right? All of these different ways in which our bodies are marked, right? And the ways that they are then able or less able, right, or differently able, right, and differentially able to move and navigate through the world based on these sort of structures, right? So when we're talking about holism, I want us to look at the big picture, right? We can look at the particulars, but we need to understand the particulars in the context of where it is, right? I want us to talk about that particular tree, but I want us to talk about it in the context of where it is in the forest, right? Is it in the, is it in the middle of the canopy? Is it all the way at the bottom? Is it in the middle of the forest, or is it out on the edges, right? Is it in the margins? Is it the same kind of tree as everything else, or is it a little bit different, right? All of these different factors are going to tell us much more about the tree than just that it's a tree, right? So let's keep those kinds of things in mind as we go, but that's what we're talking about when we talk about holism. All right, so let's talk about culture. The big thing that everybody's been waiting for while you're taking this class, right? Because you want to know about culture. What the heck is it, right? Okay. You're probably also just filling a requirement, and that's fine too. But culture is really where it's at, right? So what culture is and what it isn't. I want us to start here. Again, this is something I'm going to remind you about over and over and over in class as we proceed. And I might, as you're absorbing this information and applying it, I will remind you, right, if we're talking about something that's big C culture or little c culture, right? So big C culture. Culture is a system of learned behaviors, practices, symbols, and values that are part of a working system. Again, this holistic idea, right? But it's part of a working system that is integrated, right? We can't consider part of it without considering all of it, right? And this is big C culture, right? So it's really important that we remember that culture is learned, right? It is not innate. It is not, right? We aren't born with culture. We aren't born with big C culture, and we aren't born with little c culture. We'll get to little c in a minute, but we aren't born with it. We learn it. It's why we have words like enculturated, right? These sort of enculturate, a verb, right? A way that we learn the behaviors and practices, the symbols and values that are meaningful and important and guide our behavior in the society that we're born into, right? It's also how we can learn and adapt to and become enculturated into other cultures if we move around the world, right? So culture is learned, right? It is also not linear, right? So early anthropologists, we'll talk about how problematic those dudes were. But early anthropologists were, some of them had this idea that anthropology was linear, right? That, and what they meant by linear was that there were stages of civilization, right? And that we went from, quote, savage or primitive to something closer to civilized. That is a bunch of hogwash, poppycock, crap, not true. It's really problematic. And the reason, right, so we can take a holistic view and understand and critique this from an informed stance, right? The reason that that was the sort of running belief was one, because the machines of empire were running full steam at the time. And this was an idea that facilitated colonization and empire, and the idea that Western white dudes were superior to everyone else, and therefore should give them all their stuff. Right? So we're going to get more into this later, and we'll have a much more nuanced discussion. But this is sort of our introduction. But what I want you to take away right now is that Big C culture, a system of learned behaviors, right? And that it is not linear, right? There isn't this sort of way that these dichotomies or these hierarchies, right? So I want us to keep that in mind. There's also, right, little C culture. Get back to my clicker here, so it works. Little C culture, right? So these are all the things that are the particular practices and features of specific groups within a Big C culture, right? Pop culture, food, childhood activities, festivals, celebrations, holidays, all of those kinds of things are little C are the expressions of and the sort of action items and activities associated with those learned systems and those cultural symbols and values, right? So we are going to talk a lot about pop culture in this class as a sort of learning tool and an applied tool. You'll remember, if you haven't looked at the syllabus yet, take a look at it, or the course calendar, it'll give you an idea, and the sort of grading and assignment section in the quick reference folder in information will give you an idea of the assignments that'll be coming up. And so these are your blogs, right, will be about pop culture, and you're going to be applying anthropological analysis to these sort of cultural events, right? These digital cultural events and expressions, art, those kinds of things. So it should be great fun, but we'll be looking a lot at little C culture and talking then about the forest Big C culture around it and why it comes to be informed in the way that it is. All right, a little bit more about Big C, little C culture, cultural relativism, right? So there are two concepts here. Absolute cultural relativism, right? So every culture does things differently according to their own logics, and we really don't have, we can't say anything about it, right? It's just the way they are, right? So two problems with this. One is that it takes that static approach to Big C culture, right? And just says that it's innate, right? Or implies that it's innate and that there's nothing that can be done about it, right? Or that that it is unquestionable. It is above critique, right? But culture is dynamic and it is learned behavior. So if we want to think about that in a holistic way, we can think about the systemic things, right? Absolute cultural relativism is extremely problematic, right? Can anybody think of an example of why it might be problematic and just pop that up on the live chat? I'm going to talk about it a little more as well. But if anybody's got an idea, we will pop that in. Okay, so an example of absolute cultural relativism, right, is right. So that's that's a definition, but Okay, so yeah, so it could propagate ideas that some cultures are innate rather than learned. Yep, that's a possibility. So, um, so I'm asking what an example of absolute cultural relativism might be. So I'll just, in the interest of time, because I want to do a couple of things. One thing, so this is sort of an extreme example, and there are lots of other examples, and I'm gonna give two, right? One is Nazism, right? It's, you can, it is pretty broadly accepted that it is a horrific and terrible practice, that it is rooted in really violent and hateful ideologies, right? But absolute cultural relativism would say, oh, well, that's their culture, and we can find it really questionable, but there's nothing to be done about it. No, right? That's part of the reason why it's really problematic. A secondary example, and then I'll talk about why. I'll go into a little more detail, right? A second example would be controversies around female genital cutting, right? So again, a practice that is two things. One, very misunderstood, and also pretty widely disliked, or a lot of people are. It is considered highly problematic, right? It's part of the reason that it's controversial. So, but the absolute cultural relativist proposes that we do nothing about it, right? That it is an innate and learned, it is an innate, right, characteristic of a given society, and that it can't be questioned. So here's the thing about that, right? Culture is learned, right? But no culture is homogeneous, right? So think about a forest again, right? All of the trees are not the same, right? There is variation, right? So in the first example, right, Nazism, the Holocaust, right, there were and are people who resisted, who refused, who decried what was going on within the society, not just outside the society, right, within the society, right? If we consider it, if it's innate, then everybody should, right, be thinking the same exact thing, right? But it's not innate, it's learned. So when we take an absolute cultural relativist approach, right, we erase and ignore, we flatten, right, all of the variation that exists within a society, right? And all of the inherent struggle to change cultural practices, learned behaviors, symbols, things that are that have had meaning, or traditions, right, that are problematic or that no longer fit with broader societies, right, even in a specific society with that broader group's values and goals, right? So that's one of the reasons, right? So with female genital cutting, for example, most of the work to change that practice has not come from outside of communities that have had female genital cutting as part of their practices and religious beliefs and sacred rites, right? It has come from within those communities. It has come from the women and girls who are potentially subject or have been subjected to the practice, right? And it also, in many cases, it also comes from men in those communities who are defecting from those traditions, right? And which demonstrates a lot of the dynamism, right, within a culture. Culture is not static. It changes all the time. It changes over time, right? Right. If anybody has ever, if we think about traditions, we think about things that are old, right? Things that have been around forever and ever and ever and have always just been this way. But how many of you have started a new tradition, right? This paradox of a new tradition. Right? So culture changes. Culture is dynamic, and we have to keep in mind that it is also not homogenous, right? There is variation within as well as across groups and societies, right? So then critical cultural relativism, right, is the approach that we're going to take in this course. It recognizes the power relationships and asks which cultural practices, right, which of these learned systems are accepted, are resisted, are refused, and by whom and why, right? So it asks what's going on in the forest, right? Not just, hey, look at that pine forest over there, but it says, hey, what are the oak trees and the pine forest saying, right? What are the maple trees and the pine forest saying? What are the shrubs, going on about? How about the fungi? Right? So, or fungi, depending on where you're from and how you pronounce things, right? So we're going to use critical cultural relativism, right? Because it is much more holistic, and it allows us to recognize the dynamism within cultures, but also question things that are ultimately problematic for all of humanity, right? We'll talk about all the kinds of politics and things like that soon. But and as we go through the course, but those are the key points for right now. So there's material culture, right? The stuff that we have, right? Things, right? But material culture can also be digital, right? So it's the literal stuff with which we interact and the things to which we attach value or dismiss as not valuable, right? The junk, the trash, literally trash, right, is part of our material culture. There are anthropologists who spend so much time doing their ethnographic field work in and around trash and the way that people discard things or revive discarded things or live among discarded things, right? So literally all of the stuff, the things that we make or that we reuse or that we discard or that we repurpose, right? All of those things. It can also be intangible, like digital things, our digital archives, our social media profiles, right? Stuff that's in the ether that is there and is meaningful and impacts us in serious ways, but that we can't actually physically touch, right? Like a virus. Oh, what? Right? So we can't actually physically touch it. If we could, I fear for its safety, right? But there are a lot of things that we can't actually physically touch. Okay, so we're going to have a brief interlude, right quick. And we are going to do, so who has culture, right? Who is it that has culture? What is this culture concept, right? Genuine question. Who's got culture? Who has culture? Everyone, anyone. Yes, absolutely. Everyone has culture. So the reason I bring this up is because we're going to be talking about a ton of things this semester. But we're also going to be talking about a lot about race and race relations and cultural practices. We've also already established, or I've implicated today, that culture can be adaptive or maladaptive, that it can be, I don't like to use the concept, the terms good or bad, because in this course, we're trying to take a more nuanced approach, right? And so you can think that things are good or bad, but we want to be a little more detailed in how we're talking about those things, right? So identifying culture, right, is going to be something that's important and something that comes up sometimes in some of the race topics that we'll be talking about, right? And some of the right, is that and also this idea comes from Eric Wolf, right, and the people without culture, right? Talking about the way that some Western Europeans and then Euro-Americans, right, have taken a lot from other cultures, right? But that doesn't mean that they don't have their own culture. It's just not talked about, partially because of the way that A, culture as a concept is misused all the time, but B, because of some of that questionable work that early anthropologists did, right, that talked about culture as something that other people had, right, and that exoticized culture in these ways. So we're going to talk about some of these things, but I want you to watch a quick video, right? It's a music video, so it should be fun. I'm just going to cue it up and make sure that there are no yes, no commercials. It drives me nuts when that happens. All right, so let me screen share. While we do this, I'm going to turn my cam off. Just mute myself. Here we go, doing it. I want you to take a few minutes, listen to this song, listen to the lyrics, look at the imagery, and think about culture and the things that we've been talking about, and try to figure out what exactly this song is on about. Oh, it's going to make me do it.
Grammarly does more than catch errors. With Grammarly, you can find really...
Sorry.
This is the story of the cult favorite, best-selling, waitlist-inducing Always pen.
Okay. So, what do folks think about that particular sort of what does that bring up? I mean, how is it related to the ideas that we've been talking about, and the culture concept today? Any thoughts other than on the erstwhile styles of 1997, the inimitable David Bowie, and escape from other cultural output? Oh, say more about that. Tell me more. Escape from other cultural output. So Adam, how is that absolute relativism? There is a lot of there's a lot of understanding, right? That of what that hand signal means, right? Of what the symbolism means, right? And that it's not necessarily something that is passive, although in context, right? Finger guns, it's probably a little more passive. But if you or positive, right, has a more positive connotation. But can you tell me more about why you think that's absolute relativism? So there's a religious aspect of culture that the song is talking about here, right? Somebody commented about fear. Daniel here commented also about fear, right? So what is the fear about? Okay, thank you, Adam. That clarifies for me. I don't know that that's necessarily absolute relativism, but if we think about cultural relativism, if we think about it in terms of cultural relativism and critical cultural relativism, we can think about the different views on gun ownership, right? And that as an outsider looking into the United States, that might be seen as something odd. And in many places, it is seen as something odd. It is seen as something problematic, right? Absolute relativism would say, right, that, well, it's innate in their culture and nothing to be done about it, right? But we know that a critical culturalist perspective, right, a critical cultural relativist perspective, right, that's really what allows Bowie to make this sort of statement in general, right? Sorry, let me pull that down. Some other comments here. Okay, so Spencer notes that there's sort of some self-centered ideas, right? Or some we can maybe even say ethnocentric ideas, right? God is an American, right? And could relate to the idea of manifest destiny. I like where you're going with that. Okay, so classic parts of the way that the fears intersected with classic American culture, right? Or what is American culture, right? So right, he's afraid that so if we take Daniel's and Natalie's comments together, right, he's afraid that these various parts of classic American culture might result in death, right? That the environment doesn't make him feel safe, right? So okay, so good job, you guys. This is going places, right? So Bowie himself said that he wrote this song. It wasn't meant to be so grunge, but again, 1997, and the guys from Nine Inch Nails were producing it with him, and so grunge we got, right? So if you're into that sort of thing, yeah. But if but in an interview, Bowie said, right, that it was a commentary on American culture, but really it was a commentary on the homogeneity, right, and the and really on sort of globalization of this of kind of cultural imperialism. He was in, I think he said he was in Jakarta. I can't remember the name of the city that he was in at the time, when the first McDonald's was going up, and he just thought to himself, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Right? It's literally what he said in the quote. Right. But the sentiment was that it was being sort of imposed, American culture being imposed elsewhere, right? And even these sort of and so this is the music video is sort of an extreme interpretation about that, but it's also, you know, it centers Johnny, right? So it's this white male centered narrative. It centers sort of religion, but also violence. And if you think holistically about what was going on in 1997, right? Columbine, right, had recently happened, and which was not the first, but was one of the first big mass school shootings in the United States. And conversation around gun ownership and gun violence was really heated at that time and was really starting to take off. And if you think about where we are 23 years later, the fact that 1997 is 23 years ago, y'all, is deeply challenging to my person. But here we are, right? But this is part of that holistic view, right? Taking that into consideration. But it's also interesting, right? When we're talking about the fears, right? Or the aspects of American culture that people outside of the United States see, right? Outside of American culture, how they interpret American culture, right? Or, you know, the big sort of broad strokes, the big paintbrush strokes of American culture, then we might actually see it starts to make a little more sense, some of the symbolism that's being used, right? So these are some of the big ticket items, right? So then, in that context, who are the Nasarema? Or going off from there. Let's see. Let me share my screen again so that you can see the slide. There we go. There we go. Who are the Nasarema? Why did Miner write this article? Right. Oh, you need to see the slides, not my face. Right. What does it tell us about anthropology? Just give yourself a second and think about it. Got like 2 minutes and 10 seconds before I'm going to be strict about ending class. I'm going to keep my word to myself because I could just go on about this for the full 8 hours that YouTube allows, but that's just obscene. David, there was a strong parallel with American culture. I saw your comment earlier. I'll get back to you, but I didn't want to plug out the channel. But yes, there is a strong parallel with American culture. Could it be because Nasarema, spelled backwards, is American? So Miner was writing a satire about American culture in the Nasarema, right? The geography that he describes is literally the land between Canada and Mexico, which I know they stopped teaching geography in most schools, certainly the public schools, but the landmass between Canada and Mexico is known as the United States of America, right? So he was talking about Americans. He was also, though, talking about anthropology and anthropologists and the way that we do ethnography, right? We're going to get into this a lot more on Thursday, but I wanted to give you an idea of sort of what was going on. So if you read that article and you were like, man, these people are so interesting and weird and different, but maybe not that different, go back through and read it as though you're reading about Americans, right? The cultural hero is Washington spelled backwards. The Letipso is hospital spelled backwards, right? Mouthmen are dentists. The magic box is the medicine cabinet in our bathrooms. All of those things, right? It's not just so this is a great point, right? It's not just that our customs are sometimes ridiculous. It's that cultural relativism, right? In the positive sense, right? That everybody has customs and rituals that are particular to ourselves, right? That are particular to our big C cultures, our learned behaviors, our systems, our symbols, our values, and that then get expressed in particular ways. But it's also about how, right, we often other or exoticize or really dismiss or poo-poo or guffaw at what other cultures do, right? What other people in other cultures do, right? So how other people eat, right? So when I say other people, I'm using the little o, other people, like people who are not Americans, right? So how Canadians eat. Man, poutine is some of the best stuff I have ever eaten, right? But for people who are not into, French fries covered in cheese and gravy, that could seem like a weird thing to eat, right? South Indian curry. It's different from Northern Indian curry for a couple of reasons, right? But it's also very different to, it could be very different to, an American from Southwest Texas who's never been out of Texas, right? Yeah, absolutely. The oven thing. Oh, I'm not sure, Eloise. Sorry, I was clicking that and I didn't mean to. It was just my. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check. But we can talk about it. Pose the question actually in Perusall, and then I can get back to you guys and interact with that. Okay, so we are at our time. I am going to wrap up here real quick. We'll talk about the Nasarema in Perusall and more in discussion. And we'll talk about ethnography. So I'll just come back to this later, but you can take a quick snapshot and have a look there. We'll talk about the reading in Perusall, and we'll talk more about ethnography and this culture concept and how we talk about culture, and how we talk about others in culture, right? And who is other in culture, or in cultural writing, right? And in ethnography. Whose culture is other, right? So be getting into some of that particular language on Thursday. So again, for those of you who came in late or haven't gotten the emails, haven't checked Blackboard, catch up, get on that. We are going to meet on Mondays and Thursdays from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. So this is sort of a synchronous component to an asynchronous course. These are not mandatory. You do not have to attend the live streams, but they're here for you if you want to interact and engage and talk to some of your classmates, talk to me, do some of this fun interactive stuff. My goal is to maintain this momentum of this first meeting throughout our live streams. So to have some interactive activities, to do some video or clip viewing if we can, and they will not go longer than an hour. I'm going to give myself a 5-minute grace period, right? But it will be Mondays and Thursdays, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., right? And so it's just sort of a happy medium. But if you can't come at 9 a.m. because you have a mandatory something before that, that's okay. You can come in later. There's no worries, and you don't have to apologize for being late, and you don't have to apologize for needing to leave early. You can leave early as well. These are all going to be available to you to go back and review at your leisure. I will say, though, that if you don't join the live stream, right, you do need to check back in within 24, 48 hours of the live stream so that you can get the lectures so that you can get the material. And benefit from the discussion and stay on top of things. And then of course catch any discussion or catch any announcements that I make in the videos themselves if I forget to post an email update, which I'm hoping to remember to do for important things, but sometimes it might slip my mind. I hope you liked this. We'll keep this experiment going, and but it seems to be a pretty fun and interactive and interesting way to do class this semester. So thank you all so much, and we will see you on Thursday.